He chose the woman his parents trusted more than me, and I nodded like I understood. I stepped aside like I was being mature, like I wasn't bleeding out inside. Time passed. Things changed. And for a long time, I told myself the problem was who he ended up with. But that isn't the problem anymore. The problem is what he saw me become after he stopped watching. I'm 31 now. But this story starts when I was 27, when I still believed love was something you could build with enough effort and patience. I had been dating him for 3 years. We met in graduate school, two exhausted students studying late in the library, bonding over terrible cafeteria coffee, trading complaints about our thesis advisors, laughing at how serious we were trying to pretend we weren't. He was brilliant and funny, the kind of man who could make even the most mundane conversation feel like it mattered. I thought we were building something real. His parents never liked me. I came from a working class background. I put myself through school with loans and night shifts. His family was old money, not billionaires, but comfortable in a way that makes struggle feel like something that happens to other people. They were polite to my face and cold when I wasn't around. I could feel their judgment every time I walked into their house, like I was an uninvited guest they kept tolerating because they assumed I wouldn't last. I didn't know the decision had already been made until the night his father pulled me aside after a family dinner. That conversation didn't just end our relationship, it rewired something in me. Because when I realized I wasn't being measured by who I was, but by what I could provide, what I could guarantee, what I could make easier, I stopped begging to be chosen. And I started building a life that didn't require anyone's approval to be worth something. At the time, I thought my heartbreak would be the ending. It wasn't. It was the beginning of the version of me he would eventually come back looking for when it was already too late. When I look back now, the signs were always there. I just didn't know how to read them yet. We met in graduate school, both of us worn thin by deadlines and ambition. Long nights in the library turned into shared jokes, then shared meals, then shared dreams. He had a way of making me feel seen, like my thoughts mattered, like my effort counted. We started dating quietly, without spectacle, and for the first year, it felt equal. We split rent, we split groceries, we split time between work and study and whatever scraps of rest we could afford. I came from a working class family. Nothing dramatic, just practical. My parents taught me to value effort, responsibility, and independence. I worked night shifts to cover tuition, took out loans, lived carefully. I was proud of that resilience, even when it was exhausting. His family lived in a different world. They weren't cruel. They didn't have to be. Their disapproval came wrapped in politeness, questions about my plans that felt more like audits, comments about long-term security and future alignment, compliments that landed with a soft thud, like they were surprised I'd made it as far as I had. At family dinners, I felt like I was on trial without knowing the charges. His mother would ask about my career trajectory. His father would nod, non-committal, then change the subject to people they knew, men with established careers, clean credit histories, last names that opened doors. No one ever said I wasn't good enough. They didn't need to. The implication lived in the pauses. I told myself it didn't matter because he chose me. For 3 years, that belief carried me. We talked about the future, moving cities, getting engaged, building a life that belonged to us instead of our families. I thought love meant choosing each other even when it was inconvenient. But pressure has a way of changing people. As graduation approached and real life closed in, I noticed him hesitating more, deferring conversations, repeating his parents' language without realizing it, talking about stability the way they did. I pushed harder, worked longer hours, tried to prove, without saying it, that I could be everything they doubted. What I didn't understand yet was that I was auditioning for a role I would never be allowed to win. The night his father asked to speak with me privately wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. And when that door closed behind us, and he stood in that dark study designed to intimidate, I felt something shift. Not fear, awareness. The kind that tells you a choice is about to be made, and it won't be yours. The tension didn't explode all at once. It seeped into everything, slow and deliberate, like water finding the cracks in a foundation. After that dinner at his parents' house, the one where his father's questions lingered a little too long and his mother's smile never quite reached her eyes, something changed between us. He didn't say it outright. He didn't have to. I felt it in the way he started hesitating before making plans with me. in the way he paused when I talked about the future, like he was mentally checking it against something else. His parents' presence became heavier after that night. They called more often, invited him home more frequently, asked him to come alone, just for family things. When I asked if I could come, he'd say, maybe next time, or it's nothing important. But it was important. I could feel it. I started noticing how often he repeated their words without realizing it. We need to think long term. Stability matters more than passion. Love isn't enough if life is hard. Each sentence landed like a small cut, not deep enough to bleed openly, but enough to sting. Friends began to echo it too, not maliciously, just casually. Someone would mention a guy from his hometown who'd just bought a house. Another would talk about a family friend's son who worked in finance, already set for life. I watched him listen to those conversations more intently than before. I watched him nod along. And I started doubting myself. I worked harder, took on extra responsibilities, talked more confidently about my plans, my goals, my potential. I wanted him to feel safe choosing me. I wanted to erase the doubts his parents had planted. What I didn't realize was that every time I tried to prove myself, I was silently accepting their premise, that I needed to. The atmosphere between us grew heavier, not hostile, just strained. Conversations that used to feel easy now felt careful, like we were both avoiding something we were afraid to name. One night I asked him directly, "Do your parents still have an issue with me?" He didn't answer right away. That pause told me more than any words could have. "They just worry," he finally said, "about the future." "Our future?" I asked. He looked away. "About mine, about ours. It's complicated." That was the moment I understood the real conflict wasn't between me and his parents. It was inside him. He was standing between the life he'd planned with me and the life they had planned for him, and slowly, quietly, he was starting to lean away from me. I didn't know yet how far that lean would go. I just knew something precious was slipping, and no amount of effort on my part seemed to stop it. The seed had been planted, and it was already growing. The breaking point came on a March evening I still remember with uncomfortable clarity. It was supposed to be a normal family dinner. Nothing ceremonial, nothing confrontational. We had been talking, vaguely but seriously, about getting engaged, looking at rings online, imagining where we might live after graduation. I went into that night believing we were aligned, even if the road ahead wasn't easy. Dinner itself was polite, too polite. His parents asked about my studies, my plans, my next steps, all with smiles that never quite softened. I answered carefully, choosing words that sounded responsible, ambitious, safe. I knew I was being evaluated, and I hated how aware I was of it. After dessert, his father asked if he could speak with me privately. "Just a quick word," he said, already standing. We walked into his study, dark wood, leather chairs, framed diplomas and family photos lining the walls. The kind of room designed to make you feel small without ever raising a voice. He didn't offer me a seat. That should have told me everything. "I want to be direct," he said. "You seem like a decent young woman, intelligent, hardworking, but you're not what we envisioned for our son." I felt my shoulders stiffen, but I stayed quiet. "You have student debt," he continued, "limited prospects at the moment. And frankly, we're not confident you can provide the kind of stability he deserves." I slipped my hands into my pockets to keep them from shaking. "I love your son," I said. "I'm working hard to build a career. I believe in what we're building together." He nodded, like he'd expected that answer. "We know someone more suitable. A family friend's son, works in finance, well established. They've known each other since childhood. We believe he would be a better match." The words hit harder than I expected. "Does he know you're having this conversation with me?" I asked. "He will," his father said calmly. "We wanted to speak with you first, out of respect." Respect. The word tasted bitter. I left shortly after without saying goodbye. I couldn't trust my voice not to break. An hour later, he called me. He was crying. "My parents sat me down right after you left," he said. "They laid everything out. This other guy, his family, how much easier my life would be. They asked me to make a choice." I sat on the edge of my bed in my tiny apartment, staring at the wall. "What do you want me to say?" I asked quietly. "I don't know," he said. "This is so hard. They're my parents. They've never steered me wrong before." "They're asking you to choose between me and their approval," I said. "That's not guidance. That's control." "They just want what's best for me," he replied. "And I don't?" I asked. There was silence on the other end. Long, heavy, final. "I think," he finally said, voice breaking. Maybe I need to give him a chance. My parents trust him. They've known his family forever. Maybe they see something I don't. Something inside my chest cracked clean through. Okay, I said. That was all. No begging, no pleading, no dramatic speeches. You've made your choice, I continued. I'm just acknowledging it. I'm so sorry, he said. I do love you. Don't, I replied. If you loved me enough, this wouldn't even be a conversation. I hung up, blocked his number, and deleted every photo we had together. For 3 days, I moved through my life like a ghost. Then I made a decision. If I was going to be discarded for not being enough, I would become enough for myself. And that choice changed everything. The days after I hung up the phone blurred together. I slept in short, shallow stretches and woke up with the same thought pressing against my ribs. He chose approval over us. Not because he didn't care, but because caring wasn't enough when weighed against comfort and certainty. I didn't cry the way people expect. I cleaned. I organized. I deleted emails and unfollowed accounts that tethered me to a life I was no longer part of. I boxed up notebooks from grad school, folded clothes I no longer needed, and stacked books into neat piles as if order could substitute for answers. It didn't, but it gave my hands something to do while my mind recalibrated. Friends reached out. Some were gentle, offering sympathy without advice. Others asked questions that felt like cross-examinations. Did you try to talk it through? Did you give him time? I answered once, carefully, and then stopped answering altogether. I didn't owe anyone a defense. The truth was simple and brutal. When it mattered, he didn't choose me. On the third night, when the fog finally lifted, something else took its place: resolve. I looked at my calendar and crossed out plans that no longer made sense. I reopened a project I'd been tinkering with on the side for months, a small software platform meant to help freelancers connect with clients more efficiently. It wasn't impressive. It barely paid for server costs, but it was mine. I decided to work, not as a distraction, as a declaration. I set rules for myself. Early mornings, long nights, no social media, no updates on his life. I ate simply and slept when my eyes burned. I turned anger into focus and heartbreak into iteration. When something broke, I fixed it. When feedback stung, I used it. When the code failed, I rewrote it. 6 months later, the user base crossed 10,000. A year after that, a tech company made an offer to acquire the platform. The number they put on the table didn't feel real at first. I read it 3 times before I believed it. I accepted. I invested carefully. I started again. But the most important change wasn't financial. It was internal. I stopped asking what his parents would have thought. I stopped measuring my worth against their checklist. I stopped imagining alternative timelines where I begged harder or waited longer. I realized that the version of me who would have stayed, who would have pleaded for approval, was gone. That version had done her job. She'd gotten me here. And now it was my turn to decide what came next. Success didn't arrive quietly. It never does. About 2 years after the breakup, my life looked nothing like it had when I was 27 and heartbroken in a studio apartment. I had moved to a different city, one with better opportunities, sharper energy. I was consulting for startups, investing in early-stage companies, building things that excited me instead of trying to justify myself to people who never planned to understand me. I had also started dating again. Not seriously at first. Carefully. Intentionally. I met someone at a tech conference, a man who challenged me intellectually and didn't flinch when I talked about failure, debt, or ambition. He didn't ask about my background like it was a liability. He asked because he was curious. That difference mattered more than I realized at the time. Life settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable, and then my past reached out. One evening, I saw a message request on social media from a name I hadn't seen in years. His name. I stared at the notification for a full minute before opening it. "Hey," the message read. "I know it's been a long time. I heard about your success. Really happy for you. Would love to catch up if you're ever in town." I didn't respond. I deleted the message. But it stayed with me. A splinter of curiosity lodged where I thought everything had healed. Why now? I told myself it didn't matter and went back to my life. 3 weeks later, I flew back to my hometown for a friend's wedding. I planned the trip carefully. Short stay, tight schedule, minimal overlap with people from my old life. I believed I had it under control. I was wrong. He was at the wedding. Not as part of the wedding party. as a +1 for a mutual friend. When I saw him during the cocktail hour, his face cycled through surprise, confusion, and something else I couldn't immediately name. Regret, maybe, or recognition. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said, approaching me with a champagne flute he held like a shield. "Small world," I replied. "Friend from grad school." We did the polite dance. "How are you? How's work?" "The weather is nice. The bride looks beautiful." It all sounded rehearsed, like lines we both knew by heart. During dinner, I noticed him checking his phone repeatedly. The woman his parents had once pushed so hard, the better match, wasn't with him. Later, a mutual friend filled in the gaps. They had gotten engaged 18 months earlier. The engagement had been called off recently. Details were vague. It hadn't worked out. After dinner, he found me near the bar. "Can we talk privately?" he asked. We walked into the garden, away from the noise. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his hands, not meeting my eyes. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for how things ended, for choosing my parents' approval over what we had." "That was 4 years ago," I replied gently. "We've both moved on." "Have we?" he asked, voice unsteady. That question told me everything. That question, "have we?" followed me longer than I expected. Not because I wanted him back, not because I doubted the life I'd built, but because it reached into a place I thought was fully healed and pressed on something tender. We stood there in the garden, the sounds of laughter and music drifting toward us from the reception, and for a moment I felt 27 again. The woman who had loved him without conditions, the woman who believed effort could overcome doubt and time could soften judgment. "I have," I said finally. "I don't know about you." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and his eyes filled with something heavy. "I haven't," he admitted. "Not really." That should have been my cue to walk away. Instead, I stayed still, letting him talk, because some part of me needed to hear what came next. Not for reconciliation, but for closure. "I made the biggest mistake of my life," he said quietly. "I spent 3 years with someone my parents loved, someone who checked every box. She was stable, connected, appropriate, and I was miserable." His voice broke. "She wasn't you." The words landed harder than I expected. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I saw what you've become," he said. "Your work, your companies, the life you've built. Everyone talks about you, and I'm proud of you, but I'm also realizing what I gave up, who I gave up." That's when the darkness crept in. Not sadness, temptation. For a brief, dangerous moment, my mind offered me a version of reality where this conversation ended differently, where he apologized sooner, where he chose me then, where we rebuilt something with the wisdom we didn't have before. It would have been so easy to step into that fantasy. But fantasy is where the damage happens. I took a slow breath and grounded myself in the truth. "You didn't give me up," I said carefully. "You chose something else. That's different." He flinched. "I know, and I regret it every day." "I don't doubt that," I said. "But regret isn't the same as accountability." His shoulders sagged. "Do you think there's any chance we could try again? Start over?" The question hung between us like fog. This was the lowest point, not because I wanted to say yes, but because I understood exactly why he was asking now. He wasn't reaching for me. He was reaching for the life he imagined he could have had if he'd chosen differently. The validation. The reassurance that he'd miscalculated, not failed. I thought about the nights I'd worked double shifts, the loans, the silence after his father's ultimatum, the way he'd asked me to wait while he chose comfort. And I felt the last thread of doubt snap. "No," I said. It wasn't angry, it wasn't loud, it was final. He looked stunned, like he'd been struck. "Why?" "I'm seeing someone," I said. "Someone who wanted me when all I had was potential and debt. Someone whose family welcomed me for who I was, not what I could guarantee." I paused. "And even if I were single, the answer would still be no." He swallowed hard. "So that's it?" "That's it," I said. "You made your choice based on approval and security. I respect that it was hard, but when it mattered, you didn't choose us. I can't forget that." His eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry." "I know," I said gently, "and I hope you find peace, but it won't be with me." I walked back into the reception alone, my hands steady, my chest tight but clear. The darkness didn't follow me. It stayed behind in the garden, where old versions of us belonged. The turning point didn't happen at the wedding. It happened the next morning. I woke up in the hotel room before my alarm, sunlight creeping through the curtains, the echoes of last night still sitting quietly in my chest. For a few minutes I lay there replaying the conversation in the garden, not his regret, not his apology, but my own voice when I said no. It hadn't trembled, it hadn't hesitated. That's when I understood something had fundamentally changed. 4 years earlier, I would have begged him to stay. I would have tried to prove I was enough, that I could become what his parents wanted, that love deserved one more sacrifice. But standing in that garden, looking at the man who once meant everything to me, I hadn't felt small. I felt grounded. Back then, I thought being chosen was the goal. Now I realized being aligned was. Later that morning, my phone buzzed, a series of missed calls and messages, all from him. Apologies layered on top of each other, regret turning into desperation, questions disguised as statements. Did you ever really love me? I was under so much pressure. We could have been amazing. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the messages to my therapist, closed the app, and went downstairs for coffee. I watched people move through the lobby, laughing, checking out, starting new days, and felt strangely present. The past no longer had gravity. When I returned to my city, I told my partner everything. Not defensively, not emotionally, just honestly. He listened without interrupting, without jealousy, without trying to compete with a ghost. When I finished, he said simply, "I'm glad you chose yourself." That sentence sealed it. I realized then that the power I had now wasn't financial or professional, though those things mattered. It was internal. It was the ability to stand in front of someone who once defined my worth and feel nothing but clarity. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need validation. I didn't need him to understand. The turning point wasn't when he came back asking for another chance. It was when I realized I no longer needed one from him. The fallout didn't explode the way people imagine these moments do. There were no public scenes, no dramatic confrontations, no social media posts meant to win sympathy. What happened instead was quieter, slower, and in many ways, more revealing. After the wedding, word began to travel. Not because I spread it, but because he couldn't stop talking. Mutual friends started reaching out with carefully worded messages. He seems really shaken. He's having a hard time. I think he finally realizes what he lost. Some of them asked if I was okay. Others, less subtly, wondered if I'd been too harsh. I answered once, clearly and calmly. He made a choice 4 years ago. I respected it. I moved on. That hasn't changed. That usually ended the conversation. What I heard instead, through people who meant well but talked too much, was how his life had been quietly unraveling. The engagement his parents had pushed so hard for had already collapsed months before the wedding I attended. Apparently, it hadn't been sudden, just empty. He'd done everything right on paper and still felt like he was suffocating. His parents were furious about the broken engagement, not heartbroken, furious. They had invested social capital, expectations, introductions. His mother reportedly told him he'd embarrassed the family. His father stopped taking his calls for a while. The same approval he'd chosen over me had turned conditional the moment it failed to deliver happiness. That irony didn't make me feel vindicated. It made me feel sad. He tried reaching out again, through friends, through vague comments left on professional posts of mine. Once, even through an email sent to a public business address, congratulating me on a recent project and saying he hoped I was doing well, truly. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, because I was done participating. The most unsettling part came when a mutual friend admitted something to me over coffee. "He talks about you like you're the one that got away," she said, "like his life split into a before and after you." I stared into my cup and felt a strange mix of emotions. Not pride, not nostalgia, just clarity. Because I wasn't the one that got away. I was the one he walked away from, and that distinction mattered. What he was grieving wasn't me. It was the version of himself that might have existed if he'd chosen courage over comfort, if he'd trusted his own judgment instead of outsourcing it to his parents, if he'd believed that struggle wasn't a failure, just a phase. Watching the fallout from a distance taught me something important. When you choose safety over authenticity, you don't get peace. You get maintenance, endless maintenance. Managing expectations, managing appearances. Life has a way of quieting stories that no longer belong to you. I'm 31 today, living a life that feels earned rather than approved. My work challenges me in ways that make me feel alive, not validated. My relationship is steady, not performative. We choose each other without an audience, without a checklist, without a family council weighing the pros and cons. That kind of love is quieter than the one I imagined in my 20s, but it's deeper, stronger, and far more honest. Sometimes I think about the girl I was at 27, standing in that dark study, trying to look composed while being told I wasn't enough. I wish I could reach back and tell her something important. That rejection wasn't a verdict, it was a redirect. I didn't become successful to prove anyone wrong. I became successful because once I stopped trying to be chosen, I finally had the space to choose myself. The life I built afterward wasn't revenge, it was recovery. He didn't lose me because I outgrew him. He lost me because he never believed I was already enough. And when he came back years later, when the approval he chose failed him, when the life that looked perfect on paper collapsed, I understood something clearly. People don't come back because they love you. They come back because they miss the version of themselves they were when they felt brave enough to choose you. That's not love, that's regret. I don't hate him. I don't wish him harm. I hope he finds peace, learns to make choices that belong to him instead of borrowing them from others. But that journey isn't mine to walk alongside him. My lesson, the one I carry forward, is simple and hard-earned. If someone asks you to wait while they decide whether you're worth choosing, step away. If someone measures your value by how easy your life would be with them, leave. And if someone chooses approval over partnership, believe them the first time. Because the right person doesn't need their parents to trust you more than they trust themselves. They just choose you. And when you stop begging to be chosen, you build a life so full that anyone who walks away becomes a footnote, not a loss. This story didn't end when he chose someone else. It began when I chose myself.